So this isn't necessarily a scary story in the traditional sense of the word. It's more so to enlighten you on what we as troops had to deal with and some of the things that affect us negatively. More of the psychological side of things, I suppose. For context, I was in the Air Force for 10 years, from 2013 to 2023, so quite a while. I was working in aircraft maintenance, which makes you think, oh, you're just working on aircraft, you don't see anything crazy. I understand the thought process, but you're wrong. If you know, you know. Security forces understand too. Apes together strong. The physical effects of being in the military with a laborious job are pretty awful on their own. You have an abnormal amount of wear and tear being inflicted on your body that seems to age you expeditiously. Military years are equivalent to dog years. You can be in your 20s and you have all the bodily pains of an elderly person. Your joints tear themselves apart like two forks shredding pulled pork. Your bones feel stiff. Your muscles are knotted and strained constantly. Your hearing fades out, only to be replaced by the shrill, high-pitched ringing that drives you mad. Freedom rings every day when you have military-grade tinnitus. You're always tired, exhausted even, but you push through because the mission takes priority. I'm 29 and I feel like a dying 87-year-old. All of that is bad enough, sure, but the more taboo side of things that is scarcely talked about is the mental side of it. The military beats you down in every context. To start off, you're shipped away to a place you've never been, with people you don't know, and for many of us, it's our first time away from home. You're taken out of everything you've ever known, put in a place where you're screamed at constantly, you're sleep-deprived, you're physically exhausted, and you're constantly on edge. Looking back, boot camp wasn't bad, I'd definitely do it again, but in that time, it's a lot. I'll skip over the part about tech school, A school, or whatever the other branches call it. You're just there training for a few months learning your job, not too much to report there. For me, it all started to go downhill when I got my first duty station. I always heard jokes and saw memes about what it was like being a woman in the military, and I laughed. I thought that could never happen to me. Call me delusional, but my toxic trait is thinking that bad things that happen to other people won't happen to me, and I've been wrong every single time. 4 months into being stationed there, I had a breakup with my boyfriend of a year and a half. He told me that his dad died, ghosted for 6 weeks, and then reappeared. It turned out his dad was, and still is, very much alive. He just found another girl to cheat with. And so, John, if you're reading this, I hope you get hit on the ankle with a razor scooter. Lying about someone dying just to cheat is honestly disgusting. Pro tip, stay away from douchey military guys, ladies. Now, obviously, I was devastated. I had what thought was a good relationship with my coworkers, so when they noticed my change in behavior and asked what was going on, of course, I told them. I trusted these people. I thought that we were friends, but boy was I wrong. One coworker, a short, probably 5'5", I'm 5'9", fat, picture Danny DeVito as the Penguin, greasy, chain-smoking Hispanic guy decided that this was his chance to jump at the opportunity to shoot his shot, so to speak. Now I understand everyone's preferences are different, so don't come for me, but he is not what I would ever find attractive. I don't mind the height difference, I don't really care about that, but the rest, no thank you. Anyway, he started off by making remarks that I chose to ignore or laugh off, saying things like, "Your uniform fits you so well," and I would say, "Yeah, ABUs are great," because while they're ugly, they're pretty flattering even if you're slim and mostly shapeless like I am. And he would make comments on my body, my hair, how hot I looked whenever I was covered in grime that came from the engine exhaust. I could easily ignore all of that because it's relatively hard to make me uncomfortable. But then he started texting me things like, "I bet you look so sexy naked," and "God, it would be amazing to see you riding me," etc. So I finally blew up at him, telling him that there's no chance in the world that I'd ever be with him. He disgusts me, and to not text me unless it's work-related. And I thought that was that. It was not. He was best friends with my supervisor and the other airmen in my shop. My supervisor refused to train me and pinned paperwork on me, and my coworkers ostracized me, and they were rude. And so for the next 4 months, I only had one coworker on another shift that ever helped train me, and we ended up asking leadership for permission to pursue a relationship as he had a line number for a staff sergeant, and a lot of things happened prior to that, but it's not really all too important. Anyway, leadership, commander, chief, first sergeant, all gave their blessings and told us to keep it professional and on a need-to-know basis. Cool, all was well. Well, creepy coworker had suspicions that I was dating that coworker. I'll call him S. And so creepy coworker enlisted the help of his cohorts and ended up on a mission to ruin my life. And for months, they'd follow me around in their cars, follow me from place to place, taking pictures of me and where I was, Joe Goldberg style. I went to leadership about the stalking and I was told, this is a very serious accusation and would require us to get local police involved. Are you sure that's what you want to do? But it was said with the not-so-subtle undertone of, we're not going to be doing that. And so I dropped it. It continued for a while after that. I was constantly on edge, paranoid, anxious, always scared because I didn't know if they'd try something physical, and I couldn't escape. I had nightmares, I had visual hallucinations when I was home alone, and I was just in a constant state of fear. I wasn't sleeping, I was barely eating, and I only left to go to work. I didn't even go outside if I didn't have to. I honestly wanted to take my own life because I just didn't know what else to do. I've been trying and trying to get someone to do something, but as one of the only 3 females in my unit, it was very much the good old boys club, so no one cared. And the final breaking point for me was when we were doing a job on the jet and I was replacing a valve. It's in a tight area, as most places on the jet. A creepy coworker then shimmies his way into the tight space under the guise of holding the ducts so I can put the clamps on the valve. This space I was in requires you to basically be what we call nut to butt if you need a second set of hands. And so there he was, behind me, nut to butt, and I can feel his arousal. I finish the job, and then I go to the bathroom and just cry. After that, I just walked into the chief's office and told him what happened. First shirt comes in, and we all have to talk. We were in ISO back shop, and all creepy coworker and my dirtbag supervisor had ever talked about is how bad they wanted to go back to the flight line. And what did leadership do? They sent them to the flight line. They essentially rewarded them for their behavior. And then, that very same chief decided to slide into my DMs to try to solicit intimate activity in exchange for favors and money. Great. Another person who's meant to help guide you is a creep. I'd responded with, Chief, you're older than my father and you look like Mr. Bean, and if you contact me with this again, I'll make sure your wife and your 4 children know all about it. He blocked me, and all of a sudden all of the reports I'd made magically disappeared. Later on, when S, my boyfriend, became financially, mentally, and physically abusive, that got swept under the rug too. I guess people just randomly have fractured orbital bones and bruises of hands around their necks. Silly me. And at no point at that time in my life did I feel safe, and again, I was very much on the verge of taking my own life. In December of 2015, I went on my first deployment. I was so excited to just get the hell away from that place. I went never having had flight line experience, but very willing to learn, and my supervisor there immediately was horrible to me, and I didn't know why until years later. That entire deployment was honestly pretty awful. While there, I met what would be another obsessed stalker in the future, but a much less threatening one. The only things that kept me sane that deployment were watching all of the jets take off, fully loaded, coming back empty, and all of the different aircraft from different countries I'd normally not see, the Antonov AN-225 being one of those. Rest in peace, big guy. The most stunning sunrises I've ever seen, and all of the kind, gorgeous Aussie men. Y'all are beautiful and so fun. I get back from my deployment, and things are okay for a while. I enter the E4 Mafia, and life as a senior airman was just a fun time mostly. I go to the flight line. I'm scared that I'll see dirtbag supervisor and creepy coworker, but they're in the other AMU. My deployment supervisor was my new supervisor, and remember, he hates me. Everyone excluded me and treated me as if I were a leper. I didn't know why until I finally got so frustrated and asked, and they told me that while creepy coworker and dirtbag supervisor were in the shop, they'd said that I can't take a joke, that I'd falsely accused them of harassment and stalking, and that I was a dumb bitch with an attitude. Eventually, I disproved that, and the shop became like a family to me. Okay, so all the perks of me being a woman are pretty much all explained. Now, moving on to the next section. In the military, it's often joked that you're not a person, you're just a number. And as far as I've seen in my time, that mostly rings true. I've seen someone fall off of a stand with an engine panel, referred to as a kneecap, and hit his head on the concrete. They asked if the kneecap was okay. Meanwhile, he was bleeding and ended up having a concussion. I've broken fingers, sliced up my arms, received many shocks and burns, concussions, etc. myself. Your physical and mental health typically doesn't matter to big brass. Their concern is the mission, the statistics. Knowing you're essentially nothing to anyone, a replaceable asset, it's very humbling. I'd finally had the big mentee B, as the kids call it nowadays, and I broke down and I finally called mental health because I was really going to take my own life this time. I just couldn't take it anymore. I had to wait for an off-base therapist for months. In the meantime, I spoke to my new chief about not going on this final deployment because I honestly was not in the place for it. My dad was basically on his deathbed, and I've been dealing with these ideations and that several other NCOs wanted my slot. He said, "You're not an anomaly. You're not special. You're going." He also just generally didn't like you if you were white, so whatever. Anyway, I went on that last deployment and I met my best friend. I had the worst time, yet also the most fulfilling time. I got into the gym after having COVID and losing a ton of weight, and I still had pneumonia, and that sucked. But I hit new PRs, I got muscular, and I had my best friend, and I was the trusted cat lady. We're not supposed to touch animals, but screw that. I love all of my deployment kitties. When I got back from that deployment, I got thrown on antidepressants. Turns out, they're ones they usually give people an inpatient to keep them catatonic, and I was on the highest dose. And needless to say, I no longer felt safe to work on aircraft because I'd be putting people's lives at risk, and I no longer felt safe being alone because if I got it in my head to actually do it, I would just off myself. The only thing at the time that had ever stopped me was the fear of not knowing what happens after we die, and I'm very traumatized by religion, and I strayed away, so now I don't really know where I stand. And then my dad got COVID again, long COVID this time, and he ended up being on life support for over 6 months. I'm receiving calls from my mom saying that he may not make it through the night every other day, and I was feeling unsafe in my relationship. I thought he was going to kill me. I really know how to pick them, I guess. I was on a different antidepressant. I was drinking literally every day just to cope, and I had to be everywhere dealing with everything all at once. I was tired. I was done. They wanted me to PCS to another country. They tried to push, even though on paper I wasn't even allowed. I also didn't want to be across the globe having to spend $3,000 plus to fly back for what I thought would be my dad's inevitable funeral. I signed a form denying retainability because I knew in my soul that I didn't have another 6 years in me just to keep an assignment that I had once loved to go on. I lost my line number for tech, E6, but I wasn't too upset. I'm sure that there were other people that deserved that spot, and I had my airmen, which I lovingly referred to as my kids. They were and are some of the best people I know. I love those guys. They're in my family and my best friends. They're smart, funny, genuine, loyal, and driven young men, and I would do anything for them. They made my job easier, and I was like a rabid attack dog trying to keep those goobers safe and away from all the BS. Watching them grow up, climb in rank, become masters at their job, seeing them through their struggles. God, I'm just so proud of them, and they deserve every good thing that comes their way. They made my last 2.5 years the best that I've had in my life. And I'm sorry if this is all over the place, I just have completely untreated terrible ADHD. And on the topic of taking my own life and mental health, this is the leading cause of death in the military during maritime periods. We're burnout, we're taken for granted, we're numbers, slaves to the mission. Talking about your mental health is considered taboo, and seeking out mental help used to lead to repercussions that were pretty much a fast track to getting kicked out. Over the 10 years I was in, I can't count how many times people had taken their lives at one base that we had. Several of them were my good friends too, and one of them was my own troop. In a couple of weeks, it will be 4 years. He'd been having some marital problems, dealing with a cheating, abusive wife who was also causing him financial strain. He was also better when he decided to divorce her based on my advice, but she weaseled her way back in. And when you love someone, you just give them too many chances. You'd think being in aircraft maintenance you wouldn't be seeing any dead bodies. Well, you're wrong. My troop and I had been working weekend duty mids, Friday to Monday, 2300 to 0700 for a few months. It was the best time. Then they got rid of the permanent weekend duty shift, so we went to regular mid-shift. One Sunday afternoon, I get a call from my supervisor asking if I'd heard from my troop, and I said no, and I tried to call with no answer. So I checked online, and it said that it was active. I'd seen a meme about dying that he'd captioned, "God, I wish that were me," and I got a terrible feeling, so I messaged him and tried to call him multiple times, and no answer each time. I report this to my supervisor, and I'm asked to be a runner and do a wellness check. I speed over and knock, and there's no answer. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The house is quiet, almost deafeningly quiet. And there, in his gaming room, he sat in his chair, slumped over. He'd taken his own life, a gunshot to the head. I can remember vividly the blood spatter and brain matter on the walls, the dried tears on his face, the fact that brain matter smells vaguely like cotton candy, sickly sweet, as they say. I don't know why, but it does, and I called my supervisor and the police. I made my reports with the police, I went home, and I just sat and cried. I had to go into work that night, as I was the only NCO, and when I got to work, my other troops asked where he was, and I'd said, he had something come up and he won't be in tonight. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone until the next of kin was notified, so I sent them out to the line and I stayed inside and just cried behind my desk. That morning the commander announced it to everyone. That one was met by mutual shock and sadness, while one of the first ones was literally being joked about. People joking around that someone had taken their own life. Yeah, that shocked me just as much as I'm sure it shocks you. The second instance where I'd seen a body was my second deployment in 2017 to 2018. Now being in the Middle East, at night it gets very dark. We didn't have stadium lights on the flight line at that time, and they didn't have enough space for all the U-2s to be in the hangar tents. If you know what the U-2 Dragon Lady is, you know it's a small matte black aircraft with relatively low, thin, flexible wings. Anyway, on deployments, we have what are referred to as TCNs, third country nationals doing contracted work for us, such as cooking, maintenance, shuttle drivers, etc., and we have a speed limit while on the flight line and near aircraft, and they don't ever remember that. This particular TCN was driving a small little van that can be best described as a clown car. It's very short and has fold-down seats in the middle, and you can fit at least 10 people in it. So he's driving, it's a nightmare, we're working across the taxiway, probably 170 plus feet, and he's speeding. Only problem is, there's a U-2 sitting right in his pathway. The little van lights were bright, and they're also too low to catch the wing. Well, before I can even yell for him to stop, he goes right under the wing, taking the top of the van off in the process. I sprint over, and after seeing what I was reacting to, so does a coworker. I was hopeful that he'd ducked and he'd be fine, but as I reached the van, I learned that wasn't the case. In the front seat was his body, while on the back was his head. I've seen cleanly dissected heads thanks to the UT's anthropology research facility, affectionately referred to as the body farm, but this was different. It's not clean, it's stringy, it's messy. The dangly bits of flesh, tendons, and torn muscle, the sickly pink yellow of bones and cartilage, the small hole that is your trachea, the blood still pumping out. The look on his face, eyes, and mouth open as I'm sure realization hit far too late. And God, what a way to die. As horrifying as it was almost like a sick fascination. We make our steps with the poor Aussie security forces and we go back to work. That U-2 had its first direct confirmed kill. Now this story is already too long and it has too many side quests, so I'll just bring it to an end here. The military, even in maritime, can be a scary place. You experience a ton of trauma, you still get PTSD, your body figuratively disintegrates, and you see a lot of things. You go through a lot. They also don't tell you what it's like when you get out. Like you and your service don't really matter suddenly. How, for me at least, your entire adult life as you'd known it is over. You lose your family, you lose the structure, you lose your pride in your job, and you lose your sense of purpose. It's like you died and came back lost. The loneliness that comes with it, I genuinely can't put into words to make you understand unless you've been there. It's been almost a year since then and I still feel that way. You're never prepared for that. I regret getting out sometimes, a lot actually. And as horrible as the military has been in my time, it's also been amazing, giving me people who are my chosen family that I'll share a bond with until we die. One has, and I miss him more than anything. It was the best, worst decision I've ever made in my life, and I'm sure others out there will have worse experiences than me, and I'm sure others out there will have better experiences. But if you've never been in the military, you don't have the right to discount our struggles and PTSD just because you haven't been in an active war zone. Every branch deals with the same BS in general. "9 years ago, I had met a person that, to this day, I still wish I never did. I was an isolated, bullied, and depressed 8th grader, with the added state of being a plus-sized kid in a sports-centric town, and so basically, I was beaten and ridiculed on a daily basis. I couldn't make any new friends with my classmates, and all of my old friends from elementary school got placed in different classes, and nobody was in the same after-school groups as me anymore. We were also in a scout group, but that disbanded before I got into middle school. I was also lonely that if someone talked to me without picking on me, it made me happy. I had a Google Plus account, the only social media I could get access to at school that I kept hidden from my parents, and that I would use to check out my favorite fandoms and hopefully use to make some new friends. One day I was on Google Plus in the computer lab and I had commented under a piece of fan art of a character I liked. The person who made the post had replied to me not even a minute later. I remember getting very excited seeing that notification, my heart swelling up in excitement. The two of us spent the next 10 minutes of my class talking to each other in the comments section, and we ended up replying so much we flooded a good portion of the comments with our talk. After I changed classes, I logged back into one of the Chromebooks that we had stored in the back of the class and saw that she actually messaged me. Her name was Haley. At least she told me that was her name. But years later, I'm not as sure that it was actually her name, and in the message that I got, Haley told me that she was 2 years older than me, and that we had a lot of things in common. I spent the rest of the school day on my phone, not giving a damn about anything in my classes. We talked for the next week in our DMs until she suggested that we move to a private chat room. Later that day, we created a private chat on an online messaging site, and in our first conversation, we initially just exchanged messages. Then Haley asked if we could also do a voice call. I told her I wasn't sure, but she said that it would be easier to hold a conversation that way. After she asked me several times, I eventually agreed. After an hour of talking, she then suggested that we video chat. I agreed, both to make sure that she was actually my age and also to put a face to the name. Haley turned on her camera and she did look to be about in the same age range as me. I don't know why, but that fact haunts me more than anything else. The fact that she looked so close to my age and easily smiled and spoke so kindly made me feel like I had nothing to fear, and this led me to quickly believe that I could trust her. We ended up talking for hours after that, with me practically on cloud 9 the entire time having a friend. In the beginning of our friendship, things were going well. We told each other about our schools, our likes, and gushed over our favorite series. We talked almost every day, staying up late into the night, and we even exchanged some silly pictures of ourselves and shared memes back and forth. After we had been talking for about 6 months, Haley asked if I would like to meet her friends. At first, I was ecstatic. The thought of having some more friends excited me so much that I didn't think twice before saying yes. Haley invited me, and I got to meet her other friends. I had a completely different feeling about these people compared to Haley, though. Something about the chat room made me feel unsafe, even though they all seemed nice and Haley reassured me that I could trust them. It felt like my instincts were trying to warn me, but I wasn't sure about what, so I just ignored it. Most of them were much older than me. In the chat with her main friends, there were 6 other people. Most of them were saying that they were 18 or 19, but 2 guys were distinctly in their 20s. I asked how they all met, and they said it was either on another social media site or from real life, but they wouldn't answer any more of my questions. I was a bit naive, so all the red flags that were popping up went completely over my head. The calls that I had with them were pure chaos, from constant loud talking to frequently talking over each other. The messages were even worse, as they frequently used curse words and brought up topics that were not appropriate for a minor. I tried building genuine connections with them, but they acted dismissively toward me and seemed annoyed whenever I tried to join the conversation. Needless to say, I didn't like them very much. Haley, on the other hand, was all about them. She would pull the exact same habits, jokes, and use the same crude language as the others. They could say something incredibly problematic and she would laugh right along with them, and I was shocked by this version of Haley because she never acted like that when it was just the 2 of us. We still talked a lot, but gradually she started spending more time with her other friends than with me, and at first I thought this was fine. But the more she ignored my messages or didn't pick up my calls, it started to bother me. And when I called Haley to confront her about blowing me off, she went ballistic, saying that I was being selfish and that I didn't want her talking to her other friends because I was jealous. And I explained that that wasn't true, but she wouldn't listen and hung up to me. Haley then ghosted me for almost a month, leaving me worried and upset over what I may have done. When she started talking to me again, I was so emotionally distraught that I cried during our first call, apologizing for what I said last time. She told me it was fine, that she just needed some time alone and that she would talk to me more. And she did, although not in the way that I had hoped. Haley began telling me that she had depression, and that was the reason that she hadn't talked to me for a month. I didn't judge her and said that she could always come to me if she needed to talk, and this led to her dumping her trauma on me nearly every day, talking about how awful her home life was, her strained relationship with her mother, and how much she hated herself. I was also there to offer a listening ear and some kind words whenever Haley called or messaged me about it. This quickly became part of our routine. Almost daily, in the middle of any conversation, she'd start complaining about something that happened during her day. If it wasn't that, it was about how ugly she thought that she was and how much she hated her life and how she wanted to end things, quote-unquote. And that last part freaked me out the most. I was worried because we lived in different states and I couldn't help her in person. Every time she became self-deprecating, I would say otherwise, giving her compliments and words of affirmation for so long that my throat started to hurt and felt raw from talking. And then, just as quickly as she'd bring it up, she'd drop that conversation and we'd just continue on like before. Haley also began calling for long periods of time and messaging me late into the night. Phone calls would stretch on for hours and her texts would come in until about 3 or 4 in the morning. The problem was, it was mainly her just talking now. During every phone call, she'd take over the conversation. If I didn't respond to her messages quickly enough, she'd just spam me with multiple texts faster than I could read them. And when I tried to end the conversations, Haley would chastise me for wanting to leave, reminding me that not long ago I had wanted her attention, and she basically would guilt-trip me into staying, and it seemed to work. Even if I had lost interest in our talks or didn't want her messaging me during class, I still let her talk and replied. At least I still had her attention, and she still wanted to be my friend. And this cycle went on for 2 years, and it left me feeling more anxious and exhausted than anything else. It felt like we had nothing in common anymore. She would either ghost me for a week or spend the entire weekend texting me nonstop. The topics about her self-worth also got worse. They escalated to her messaging me goodbye or "I can't live like this anymore," and then not responding to any of my messages or calls. She would also send me pictures of her marking herself, describing how it felt. And the sight of those messages would send me into panic attacks, and I would end up in tears each time. The group chat with her other friends also got worse. Arguments broke out frequently, drama and gossip spread like wildfire, and people were blocked and unblocked almost every few days. I hated talking to them, and they began ganging up on me in messages, and Haley was often the first to make rude jokes about me, and they would all laugh. I grew sick of it and stopped messaging and calling both Haley and her friends, despite her begging me not to. One late night, while the group was arguing over text, I hit my breaking point. I was tired of all the drama and being treated like crap, so I messaged the group chat, telling them that I had enough, and privately messaged Haley that I needed a break. Then I left both chat rooms, blocked everyone, deleted my messaging account, and removed the site from my computer's history. And once it was all over, I felt like I had been freed from some kind of prison, and all I could do was cry in relief and euphoria that it was finally over. I later found out that all of the pictures Haley had sent me were stock images and photoshopped. After doing a bit of digging into her background, I learned that many of these things just didn't add up. She was actually a lot older than she had originally told me, at least 6 or 7 or 8 years older, and this meant that when we first met when I was 14, she must have been well over 20 years old. Many things from our interactions still haunt me, especially the pictures of her marks and her scathing, self-deprecating messages. For almost 3 months, I had nightmares about Haley getting back in contact with me and what she might say or do. I have much better friends now, and I am absolutely certain that I will never have to hear from Haley again, but sometimes I still wonder who that woman really was, and what it was about me that she found so interesting. Hopefully, I'll never find out. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed very sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after 2 friends mentioned that they knew him from a class and said he was generally a funny guy. We attend a small but prestigious university, which also reassured me that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 p.m. for a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He had texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing up at that time. He drove me to his apartment, and although I felt uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything that I thought I knew about him. The apartment was dimly lit, with only one candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much illumination. It was a multi-bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more unusual. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. Suddenly, he shifted the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets and asked if I had ever seriously thought about killing someone. When I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship, killing 5 people. When I was unsure of how to respond, he brushed it off as a joke and then said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend. At this point, I was extremely uncomfortable and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left, he said he wanted to show me something and pulled out a rifle, which he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said that he had gotten it for hunting, but couldn't imagine killing an animal. We left and made it back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told has been shocked by how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that there was something deeply wrong with this guy, something more sinister. Any thoughts on this would be much appreciated. I'm a 29-year-old woman. I lived in a big city all my life, but at the beginning of April, I moved to a medium-sized town about 1 hour from that big city, along with my sister and our 4 pets. This happened after a month of living here. My sister was preparing for her final presentation for her arts undergraduate, which was going to be shown in the city, so she had to spend the whole day there to make her preparations. I was left home alone with our cats and dogs, so in the early evening I decided to go for a long walk with my 2 dogs. I walked for like an hour, But about 5 away from our home, as we were headed back, I saw a man knocking on the door about a block away. I thought he looked a bit weird because he would knock on the door, look around, and then knock on the door and then look around again, but he didn't look dangerous, so I just kept walking since I had to pass by him to take the street that would take me to my home. When I was about 10 meters away, he looked my way and started walking towards me. He was tall and slender and was carrying what looked like a box of candy. He asked me if I had any coins to spare, and I told him, "Sorry, mate, I only have dog's poopy bags. Have a good one." And I was ready to keep walking when he saw one of my tattoos and stopped me. Now, for context, I obviously have tattoos. I'm not heavily tattooed, but I have several on my arms and legs, and since I was wearing shorts, the ones on my legs were visible. The specific one he was looking at is of a ghost woman in a traditional Japanese style. As he stopped me, he said, "That's a really cool tattoo. Would you give it to me?" I just laughed uncomfortably, thinking he was joking, but he was dead serious, just staring, unblinking at my tattoo. He then continued talking. "No, so you're just gonna let the maggots eat it? That's such a shame. It would be better if a person ate it." At this point, he raised his face and looked me straight in the eye with a very flat smile that seemed to be an attempt to be friendly, but only made me feel even more uncomfortable. He then asked me for my name, and not wanting to antagonize him, I gave him a fake one, and let's just say that was Regina. He then asked me if I lived in town, to which I also lied and said that I was from the big city, just visiting. He then told me that he used to live in that city too. He lived on the streets downtown. He told me he used to rap in buses to get money, and just out of the blue started rapping about me, still looking me straight in the eye. He rapped about how I was very pretty, how amazing my tattoos were, and in his rap he said my name was Lorena. I corrected him and said my name was Regina, and not Lorena, and since I had a suspicion that he realized that I had given him a fake name and was testing me, he just smiled and nodded. He then asked me if I'd given him my number. I said that me and my dogs had to go home, that we were expected. He pointed at a butcher shop a block away and told me that we could sit over there while I gave him my number, that it wouldn't take long, but I told him that I couldn't, that the one waiting for me at home was my boyfriend, but I was lying again since I was home alone. And his smile faded a bit and he just said, "Well, that sucks." I wished him a good evening and turned around to leave, only for him to drop to his knees and grab my leg with both of his hands. He started caressing my tattoo while whispering, "It really is a goddamn cool tattoo." My dogs are pretty friendly and they were very calm during this whole exchange, but when he grabbed my leg, they started growling. I pulled my leg out of his hand, wished him a good evening again, and just walked away as fast as I could. I took a longer way home to make sure he didn't follow me, and once home I took a shower and scrubbed my leg really well, since I felt gross after all of that. So a kind of scary thing just happened to me a couple hours ago, and I'm still kind of shaken up about it. A woman was knocking at my door, and when I answered, she said she heard a child screaming and an older male yelling. She told me it was super loud, and she heard an older man saying something along the lines of, "People are looking for you now." I live in a duplex with my boyfriend and dog, and we live on the main floor, and we have a neighbor who lives by himself in the upstairs unit. We have absolutely no children, and I also found it odd because moments before this, I was in my shared laundry room that you have access from the backyard with the back door open, and I always do that to let my dog out in the backyard, and I heard absolutely nothing. The way she was talking and the look on her face seemed really genuine, so I was trying to assure her that we had no children, and she probably just heard one of the neighbor's kids. We live close to the city in a populated area, so there's lots of kids and they scream when they're playing all the time. We just kept going in circles. I didn't have any children in the home, and she most likely had the wrong house. I even offered her to peek over my fence and check the yard, but otherwise that was all I could do. But when I'd say these things, she'd just stare with this accusatory look in silence, and then start again on what she'd heard. and that's when she began to suddenly force herself through the doorway, like a foot or a hand. By this point, our upstairs neighbor and my boyfriend heard what was going on and joined me in at the door. She just refused to accept my explanations and eventually fully got herself into the doorway. She clearly wasn't going to leave, so that's when I called the police. She stood in that doorway until they arrived. After the cops talked with her and asked us questions, we found out that she admitted to using meth earlier that morning, so they told us that she was just experiencing hallucinations due to coming down from that. But they had to keep telling her, "You're free to go," and she very hesitantly left. She kept turning around and looking at the house, so the cops even hollered out, "Let's just do a quick check," to make her believe that they searched the house. I know this could have been so much worse and isn't the craziest thing on this subreddit by any means, but I'm still so nervous that she'll come back, and I can't stop checking the windows. This was some years ago when I was living in a different city. I hadn't really been on my own all that long, and my housing situation fell apart at the last minute, so I had to scramble to figure it out. Meaning, you guessed it, random roommates. Now, the year before, I'd had a random roommate that was the most amazing person and ended up becoming a great friend, so I figured this might be the same. It was not, but that's actually not the focus of this story. Now, enter the roommates. Ben, who I did actually know a bit from the previous year and was becoming friends with, Tom, and Mike. Now, this was the first couple of days after move-in. We all hung out to get to know each other better, but Tom and Mike hadn't fully moved in yet. It was a big old house separated by floor and the top level locked at the stairs. Now, this is important to note. Ben and I lived upstairs with Tom and Mike downstairs. I've always been paranoid and definitely have good reason to be, so when I'm home, all doors are locked. So when I leave, all doors are locked and I sleep with my bedroom locked. I was home alone with Ben at work and Tom and Mike sort of in and out moving stuff in. I'll note here that both had a lot of expensive stuff, like in the 5-figure range. Well, I was watching something on my laptop in my room, bedroom locked and both entrances to my part of the house locked. I started hearing a lot of noise coming from downstairs, sounding like doors and cupboards open, furniture moving, etc., and figuring it's just Tom or Mike, until I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. I was technically supposed to be somewhere at that time, which they knew, but it had been canceled last minute, so no one would have known that I was home, and they had no reason to come upstairs when they knew that both of us were supposed to be gone. That was when I got panicky, hearing them come closer and closer to the top of the stairs. I've never sat so still, and then the knob began to jiggle. I could hear it clearly as my room was closest to the entryway. At this point, I'm on with 911 whispering that someone is in my house without giving away that I'm there to whoever it was. The house was super close to downtown and cops arrived in mere minutes, but that was the longest of my life at that moment. The downstairs was completely ransacked, like something out of a movie. It was so surreal to see. They'd taken over $20,000 in electronics. Honestly, I don't remember the exact amount. Just about that, I think. Broken furniture and plates and stuff, and even ripped through the mattresses. It turned out Tom and Mike had left a door unlocked when moving, and this would not be the last time before I fled this house. They were gone before the cops showed, so I'd spend the next several months afraid that they'd come back, though it would turn out to be the least of my future worries. So I'm glad I always locked my doors. Considering the way downstairs looked, I don't know what they would have done to me. And to whoever was on the other side of that, thankfully locked door, let's not meet. I recently read a story on Let's Not Meet that brought back old memories of my dad's crazy ex-girlfriend, and this took place when I was around 8 or 9 years old. So I guess it would have been around the year 1997. My parents have gotten divorced several years prior, so me and my little sister, 2 years younger, used to stay with our dad every weekend. One day he introduced us to his new girlfriend, Rachel, who was a tall blonde woman that had apparently won some kind of beauty pageant or something. I remember those first months of getting to know Rachel as fun. She seemed like a nice lady. I also think my initial impression of her was helped by the fact that she had a rather cuddly gray parrot and a pet raven that could talk, which of course made my younger self quite ecstatic. But after a while, things started to change. I began to notice that she could be a bit odd at times, saying weird things or acting a bit strangely. We started seeing her less frequently when staying with our dad, and then one day he told us that they broke up and that we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He also told us that we shouldn't talk to her or go home with her if she showed up at school. Not long after that, Rachel really started harassing my father. She would randomly turn up at places that we went to visit during weekends, trying to talk to us. She called him nonstop on the phone when we were at home, crying, making threats. It usually didn't stop us until we pulled the plug. Years later, I found out that she even threatened to kill me and my sister on several occasions and that Dad got a restraining order. Rachel also keyed my dad's car, broke into his company to trash it, and stole a lot of money that he never got back. She even started writing threatening letters to my mother. My parents have always been good friends ever since the divorce, and it all culminated with a letter from the authorities. A letter accusing my dad of being a child abuser. I still vividly remember how Mom sat us down in our room, holding the letter, a deep look of concern on her face, asking if Dad had ever touched us inappropriately, which of course he never has. It later turned out it was Rachel who had falsely accused him of such in an attempt to prevent him from seeing us. I remember feeling really angry and upset that she had gone to such lengths. The last memory I have of Rachel was a few weeks before Christmas. We were staying in my dad's place over the weekend. It was a 2-story apartment complex with a large window spanning an entire wall, floor to ceiling, in the living room where we had just sat down to watch TV. Next to the window there was a glass door leading onto a stone patio bordering a lawn that ended with a tall hedge, and on this particular day the outdoor lights had been switched off, which means it was pitch black outside as the intro to Superman started playing. A while into the episode, I suddenly heard a strange, sharp noise coming from the window. It sounded like something was clawing on the glass in an attempt to get in. The sofa I was sitting on was placed right in front of the window, so I had my back toward it when I slowly turned around to look over my shoulder, heart thumping in my chest, hair standing on end as if I was being watched. But all that came into view was pitch-black darkness lurking behind my own reflection. By this point, Dad had also heard the sound and gotten up to turn on the patio lights. When the outside suddenly flooded with light, I found myself staring in the face of a smiling blonde woman peering into our living room. And need I tell you that I screamed? Both my sister and I flew up from the couch like it had been scorched with fire and ran behind our dad. When I looked toward the window again, I saw Rachel with both of her hands up against the glass, tightly cupped beside her face as she was trying to look inside. The patio door was right next to her. I tugged on Dad's shirt and whispered if the door was locked when she reached toward the handle. That millisecond of doubt flashed across my dad's face. It still haunts me to this day. Rachel truly looked like a madwoman as she furiously jerked on the handle in an attempt to get in, briefly pausing to peer through the glass now and again. I remember thinking Dad looked oddly calm as he ushered us around a corner wall, telling us to stay out of sight as he walked toward the patio door. We begged him not to go outside, thinking that she could have a knife hidden somewhere. So we opened up a small crack with the door, firmly holding onto the handle, and asked what the hell she was doing in his backyard. She tried to get him to let her in, putting on a big smile, tossing her hair, but Dad obviously wouldn't budge, telling her to leave or he would call the cops, to which she eventually conceded, leaving a bunch of Christmas presents behind. When Rachel was out of sight from the window, Dad went out to make sure that she was gone, picking up what she had left behind on his way back. None of us wanted anything to do with the presents. Something just felt really off about them, and so they ended up just still fully wrapped in the trash. I have lived in the same neighborhood for many years, and this is also true for many others here. Even if we don't all speak to each other, we often recognize people, at least by sight. A year ago, I passed a man near my house whom I had never seen before. I noticed him because he had a rather unusual appearance, about 50 years old, tall, thin, with an emaciated face, dressed in a suit and tie. From the look of his face, he didn't seem to be in good health. At first, I thought nothing of it. However, over the past year, I've noticed that there are times, sometimes for extended periods, when he appears wherever I am. And to give an example, last Wednesday I went to the pharmacy and he was behind me, also going in. And on Thursday I went to a neighboring town to do some shopping and saw him in the street. On Friday, as I left my house to go to the gym, he was in front of my house and walked part of the way with me before taking another street. And this sort of thing can go on for several days in a row and then stop, only to resume after some time. He is always in a suit and tie, as if he were going to work, but I see him at all times, weekdays, weeknights, mornings, afternoons, and evenings. I don't know exactly where he lives, but I know he isn't from my immediate vicinity, and I had never seen him speaking to anyone in the street. Yes, I know it could be all a coincidence, and it most likely is, but I admit, it's starting to make me wonder. It's giving me a feeling of being followed, though I may be overreacting. Has anything like this, or a strange feeling towards someone, ever happened to any of you? Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday and Thursday at 9 p.m. EST, and there are super fun live streams on Sundays and Wednesday nights. If you got a story, be sure to submit them over at my email, letsreadsubmissions@gmail.com, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for members of the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories and big compilations located anywhere you listen to podcasts. All links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends, and remember to snuggle a snozcumber and play butt bongos at the DMV.